I'm Kathy O'Donnell, a parishioner for 42 years at St. John's Norwood in Chevy Chase. I have volunteered in the archives at St. John's since 2008 and served as the archivist there since 2011. The files in the archives go back to the founding of our parish in 1873. While doing research on the founding of St. John's, I was dismayed to discover that prior to the first services in Bethesda, Chevy Chase, our founding rector, the Reverend James Battle Everett, was the first commissioned chaplain in the Confederate Army and served in the cavalry. He was very proud of his service and the institution of enslaved workers in the South. He was so proud that after he left St. John's, he wrote a book in 1901 entitled Old Plantation, How We Lived in the Great House and Cabin Before the War, which, according to Wikipedia, was written as a response to Uncle Tom's Cabin. Much later in 2011, while reading some of the earliest newsletters written by the rector in 1919, the Reverend James Kirkpatrick, I became quite upset as his writings were very appalling. His words were full of hatred for many different groups, for instance, Catholics, especially the Pope, anyone of color, immigrants, etc. To say that I was shocked would be a gross understatement. I went to my rector, the Reverend Dr. Sari Atik, and had a long talk asking for guidance, as I didn't feel I could continue working in the archives. He was very thoughtful and asked me to consider the time period in which it was written and reminded me that it was the feeling of the entire country at the time. He asked me to continue my work. So I continued learning firsthand about the history of St. John's by reading more of the files in the archives. In December 2018, I gave a very whitewashed history of the parish, which was well received. However, I kept digging into the founders of the parish and discovered that all of those who had signed the deed were enslavers. At about this time, fellow parishioner Jay Malin approached me with more information on enslavers, which he had found while doing research for a documentary he was doing about 3 lynchings in Montgomery County. We were both appalled at what we were finding. Jay's foundings were that there were covenants and other exclusionary methods in the surrounding area which forbade Jews, Middle Easterners, and colored people from buying in the area of Chevy Chase, and that the neighborhood was founded by an unabashed racist, Senator Newlands. After some prayer, more reading, and gathering of information, I felt that the story of the racial intolerance in our early history needed to be told. In January 2020, with Sari's blessing, I shared what I had learned with the parish in a joint presentation with Jay. I had written articles in our newsletter to let people know what I would be talking about. Consequently, there seemed to be no surprise at what I told them, but there were lots of questions. The main question was, when did this attitude change, as it obviously has changed at St. John's? I have no definitive answer, just that over time, as in our country, attitudes have changed for the better, but there is lots of work still to be done. Others have thanked me for what I have found and for sharing this information. I have also given a presentation to Bethesda Historical Society, which had basically the same reaction. Discovering the truth of our founding was and still is a difficult matter to deal with. The fact that slavery was accepted as the norm is not okay. The money that established our church to be was tainted money. The worst part for me is that those feelings of hatred for a group of God's people were accepted as normal by the church at St. John's and in the Diocese of Maryland and then Washington. There have been a lot of changes at St. John's over the years. Our first African American associate rector, the Reverend Janice Robinson, served from 1988 to 1995, and she was much loved. Others have followed as associate rector, senior warden, and members of the vestry. All are welcome now at St. John's as we continue to hope for changes in the hearts of all.